Okay. So again, thank you for everyone for joining us today. Today is a pretty special webinar. It's certainly a topic about which we get a lot of questions from our customers, and we are really excited about putting on this presentation today. My name is Juan Vasquez. I'm the Customer Support Manager for Genovo Software. I'm joined on the line by Robin Kamencheka, who's one of our technical application specialists. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about different ways of how you can analyze titration data in FCS Express. And this webinar will also kind of serve as a kickoff for some templates that we now offer for download on our website. And Robin will actually go into detail about that. Okay. What we'll also do is we'll also talk about some of the different ways you can actually titrate your data. We'll not only talk about the template that Robin has created and will demonstrate for us, but also some of the other methods that we can use to basically to analyze titration data in FCS Express. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn over the mic to Robin, and she's going to start presenting and talking to you about what we now offer through a template that's now available for download on our website.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be joining on this titration webinar today. I hope everybody's doing well. So I'm going to cover the importance of antibody titration before we get started at looking at this layout. So antibody titration is a crucial component of panel optimization. What we put into the instrument is going to reflect in our data that we get out. So if we do the work up front, we're going to get the results that we're looking for. We can rely and trust that what we get as a result is good, is from good data. So what does titration do for us? It reduces that antibody aggregation potential, and so it will reduce that background noise. If we have a lot of extra antibodies, they just have the affinity to attract one another. You get these like, I don't know what this population is, it's expressing 4 different markers and it shouldn't be. Those kind of things will impact the end results for your data. It also minimizes the opportunities for your antibody to bind non-specifically, right? We want to make sure that when we see this binding, we want to make sure that it is actually getting to the right antigen and not just binding anywhere. It also enhances the resolution of low, moderate, and highly expressed populations. We know that sometimes there is a different level of expression. We see some cells that lowly express something, then there's moderate expression and high. We want to be able to distinguish those populations and not be like, ooh, is that low expression or is that just non-specific binding? We want to be certain that when we're looking at our data, we can draw conclusions and rely on the results that we're getting. Also, over time, you're going to decrease the cost and increase the experimental efficiency. So a lot of times manufacturers will give you a concentration to use, and a lot of times it's an overshoot, right? They want to make sure that everything is saturated. And that can be great, but if you're increasing the opportunity for aggregation and non-specific binding, it can actually be detrimental to your experiment. The worst thing that you can do is have to repeat an experiment because you're not sure what the results mean, right? So that's how it's going to increase that experimental efficiency for you. So let's talk about compatibility with your data. FCS Express is compatible with data files from all the flow cytometers on the market. So you're not going to have to worry about, oh my gosh, can I use this for my data set? Yes, you can bring it into FCS Express, and we're going to be able to reflect those scaling options and how stuff looks in your acquisition, on your acquisition software. We have a lot of tools in FCS Express to make sure that you can get that same view. So you're not going to spend a lot of time making sure that you're like, okay, I want to, being oriented in your data. We can offer those tools right up front. So one of those tools is called our instrument specific settings. You can set default settings for a specific instrument. So when you bring it into FCS Express, it's going to look just like it did for acquisition. So you can just keep going with that data analysis and not get stuck having to worry about making all of these adjustments as you go. So let's get started about talking about this Universal Antibody Titration Template. We know that we have a lot of users that are doing titration experiments, and the problem was that doing that analysis was often really difficult, right? We're moving between different software platforms and we're, going back and changing gating, and it became kind of cumbersome. So a lot of people have decided, well, I'm going to skip the titration because it's just a lot of work. The template we created in FCS Express is to facilitate and simplify the analysis. So once you download this analysis, we're going to pop in our data, and we're going to be able to move through this quite quickly, as you'll see when I introduce that layout. When we bring that data into this layout, we make a couple adjustments to parameters, maybe modify a couple gates, but then everything downstream is generated for us automatically. We get a stain index, a separation index, and signal to noise ratio, and a comparison of that stain index to separation index regression plot automatically generated after we put in our data. Also, the calculation to get an antibody concentration or an optimal antibody concentration is also auto-calculated by FCS Express, and we're using 90% of the Vmax to make that calculation. With batch processing, you can actually, once you've done this work to get it set up for the titration data, you get to export those results in your report files quickly and simply by just hitting a button. The software does the rest of the work for you. We know also that there's different titrations that people are doing out there, so we didn't want to just limit and be like, okay, we're going to do a 5-point titration and that's it. If you guys are doing more, you guys will have to figure it out. So we actually generated 3 different titration points. We have one that has 5, one that has 6, and one that has 7. So anything that you're looking for in there, of course, this is a good starting point. We can either delete or add as needed. Just reach out to us at support, and we're more than happy to get you started using that template. And I should note, while we expect this template to work with any of the data sets that you're going to bring in, there may be some instances when you have to make some modifications. And if you're not sure how to make that modification, how to adjust due to the platform that you collected your data on, just reach out to us and we'll make sure that we resolve that for you. So now let's go ahead and just take a look at this layout. So I've opened this layout, and the first thing that you're going to see when you open the layout from your download is this startup script. This is really nice. It's kind of a way to streamline bringing your data in. So if we read this first prompt, it's asking for the first file in your titration data. To find this data, you can click on the ellipses button here, and then it'll bring you to a window to find your data. And so I've opened the folder over here, so I'm just going to select that first data file. I only need to bring in one at this time, and click open, and then I move to my next step. My next step, it's asking for my forward scatter parameter. I only have one available, so I'll check here. Then I'm looking for my side scatter parameter. Check here. And then finally, it's asking for that parameter that I'm using for that titration, the one that I'm using to gather this information. So I'll do my CD3 FITSI here and do finish. Now, as soon as I bring this into my template, that first page with the instructions is going to disappear for me. So we have that auto hide feature, so you don't have to look at that, or it won't be exported out with your results page. And we will take a look at that again in just a moment. So here we have our data files loaded. And as you can see, we have some arrows showing up, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do next? Well, what has happened here is that our scatter gates are just not applicable to this plot right now. We have this amazing feature in FCS Express where we can just replace a gate. So if I go to my gating tab, I grab the gate that I'm going to use for to determine the population for my scatter gate. I just start clicking this gate in, dropping it in. And when I click to close that gate, I'm going to get this gate window. So all of our tools in FCS Express usually have multiple functions, right? So I don't have to create a new gate from this window. I can actually replace an existing one. So in this template, you want to replace this scatter gate because everything downstream is built from this scatter gate. And then we'll click OK here. And then we're going to see now that other plots have been populated. Again, we kind of have the same thing happening in our additional plots. We have some of these populations that aren't exactly demonstrating the best here for where our positive and negative staining is. You can either find the gates or you can simply recreate them. I find it's a little bit easier to just redraw them in. So let me just grab that rectangular gate here, grab my negative. Again, in that same gating window, I just replace the gate, use the drop down, find my negative staining, and click OK. I'm going to do the same thing for my positive. Replace that same gate for the positives here. Click OK. And now you're going to see like everything is populated downstream. Now it's important to note here, if we look at this third column of plots, we have our 84th percentile control plots. So we don't make any adjustments here. If we need to make any adjustments, it's going to be in this middle column for our negative and positive staining. What this is doing is drawing that value that we're going to use for that separation index. So as we're looking at these plots, I can see that my positive is kind of shifting out and my negative is expanding. One of the tools that we can use in FCS Express to make sure that we're gating the best way is we can use data-specific gates. One way is to hold the shift key down when you're moving that gate and just slide it to the new location. You'll see on the gating tab that it has that gray background, so you know that it's active. Additionally, if you wanted to click it from the gating tab, you can do that as well. I find the shift key to be a little bit more, it's a little easier when you're actually working in real time. And then we can just adjust these gates as needed, and this will be specific to the data file. So I won't have to worry about, it's not moving that first gate up here, it's just moving down here as I'm adjusting this. And then of course, where we see a little more spread on our negative, we can do the same thing, right? Just expand it out a little bit. I want to make sure I get the best data. So now that I've got my gating strategy or gating set up here, some important things to note also is that we can introduce a name. And what's great about this token here that we've introduced in the template is this will actually be used for any of the output or batch files that we create. So it's actually a CD350 experiment, so that's already there, so we'll leave that be. And now below, I'm going to introduce the concentration. So it's in my file name, so that makes it nice and convenient here. So I'm going to do the 0.3, 1.25, 2.5. There we go. And so what this does, again, we use tokens to introduce information in a bunch of different places. So these are actually going to be connected to our spreadsheet, which we're going to go to in just a moment. I do want to show you that when we brought in just that one data file through the script, not only did it bring in the remaining data files for us, but if you look at how they're arranged in these plots, we have every concentration displayed in different plots along the way. So now when I go to our stain index page, all of this has already been built. I just did the simple steps in the beginning to make sure my gates were correct, introduced the information about concentrations, and then I have these plots already created for me. I can see these regression plots, I can look at the curve, I can look at the Vmax here, and the R values. This is that optimal antibody concentration to use. It's calculated for you automatically in 3 different ways, using the Vmax of stain index, the Vmax of the 84th stain index or the separation index, and also the Vmax of that signal to noise ratio. Then when we look at the bottom here, we also have a spreadsheet that's auto-generated, and it has all the information that we need to create those plots above, right? We have the concentration values here. We have the median of the negative, the median of the positive. We have standard deviation information. All of this has been created for you in the background. You didn't have to come in here after you've loaded your data. The software is going to take care of a lot of this in the background for you. So I do want to show you this page because it's very important to know and understand like how we're introducing different things and some of the tools that we're using to draw out this information. So if you want to look at the referenced formulas or the formulas used in the spreadsheet, they're all on this page to kind of give you those tools to work with this titration layout. So I'm going to move back to our analysis introduction page here, or the first page for our analysis plots. And I'm actually going to remove our data. Actually, maybe I'll just reopen a new template here. And while we're waiting for this to reopen so I can show you the next step of some of the tools that are built into FCS Express, does anybody have any questions? Please feel free to put them in the question box. I'm more than happy to make sure that you guys get your questions answered during this call. So this kind of brings us back to the beginning, right? We have this startup script. This time I'm going to opt out. If you don't want to use the startup script, you can just click cancel here. Now we're going to take a moment to look at this titration template information, because there is some important information here about, using the startup script, how to order your data files in that folder to make sure they go from lowest to highest. So when they come into the software, they're nicely ordered and put into the appropriate plots. We do also have some additional information about SciTech. So with SciTech, with your SciTech data, there are some user options that you want to make sure are changed so that when you bring your data in, you're actually able to use this template. So we're going to go to our file and options to look at those FCS Express options. It's down here under the data loading, FCS files, instrument specific settings. So this is also the place where you're working with different platforms. We can introduce some settings here, even if your instrument isn't listed. We can add new instruments here so we can make sure that when you're bringing your data in here, you're getting exactly what you want in this template. Specifically, we're talking about SciTech right now, so I'm going to grab that SciTech SpectraFlow from the instrument specific settings list, and then we're going to look at this user setting. So one of the ones that we want to make sure is changed is delete fluorescent parameters after spectrum merge. We want to see each detector individually, so when we bring in that titration data, we're able to look at the detector. So we'll go ahead and click OK here. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this layout as if I'm starting all, over, right? This is a template, so I have to bring in my data. And if you're not sure what to do, we do have some tools here for you. So I didn't part this out before because we used that startup script and it helped build a lot of things for me by myself. But if you need some, you've opted out of the startup script and then you're like, okay, great, now what do I do next? We already built in an SOP. So it's another tool here for you within FCS Express. So now you can still use this template, get some guidance, making sure that you're getting, taking the steps that you need to build this layout. So I'm going to go ahead and do run SOP. And this is going to give me just a couple of steps that I need to follow to make sure that I'm getting this data in the right way. So the first step here is just to add my data files. In the data list, I click on that blue bus icon. And now I'm just going to grab a different data set here. I'm going to grab some SciTech data. And we're only doing a 6-point today, so I'm going to grab these first 6 data files, click open, and they're going to be populated into my data list. Now, one of the things that's really nice about this SOP too is if I haven't added something or met the conditions for a step, it's going to let me know. So right now it's saying the condition for advancing to the next step is not satisfied. So it's going to wait for me to do to get this data in here. And there we go. So now once I have my data in, you see now the condition is met, so I can move on to the next step. So now it's asking me in this order to put in the information for the titration antibody and then put in the concentrations as well. So this is a CD3 still, but I'm going to change this FTSE to V7A because I know, what the difference is here. Now again, we get to enter in that titration information, right? So 0.15, 0.3, 0.6, and again, this is auto-populating that spreadsheet on the other side. So this is a really important step. And so we put a condition here to make sure that that was completed. Now when we move to the next step, we can actually just dock this to the side here so we get a little more space. It's asking me to select the plots within this green border, right? So it's going to help guide me to make sure that I'm getting the right things, right? It already has my side scatter and forward scatter set up here, so I don't really need to change those parameters per se. But if you're following this for the first time and maybe you haven't set this up yet, this drag and drop works just like it would in PowerPoint, right? So I can just take my cursor, start dragging over the plots that I'd like to select, drag down to the bottom, and it's going to highlight all those plots in that first column. This makes it really efficient when I go to that format window, overlays. I can now adjust those parameters for all of the plots. I didn't have to do it one by one. It's a real time saver when you're working through this. Since I like the setup for these parameters, I'm going to leave them as they are. Let's go ahead and close this window. And now we're going to click to the next step here. The next step, it's telling me in this first plot here that I'm going to adjust this scatter gate, right? So I can either create a new scatter gate like we did before in the other template, or I can just adjust what we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and just start making adjustments. And of course, our gates are universal unless we tell them not to be. So as I adjust this gate, you're going to see that all my plots are updating with every movement and every change that I'm making. So here I've selected my scatter plot. I look in my staining plots. It has selected the right fluorescent parameter here, so we won't have to worry about making adjustments, but I can see my populations here and they look pretty good, right? So let's move to that next step. And now we see that the SOP is actually guiding us through the next part, right? We know that with different data sets, this parameter probably, we're not going to be able to know in advance which parameter you use in a given experiment. So we can just start grabbing, see if I can move my text box a little bit out of the way there. All right. We can start grabbing those plots again in that orange boundary. And actually for this one, we're going to select both columns. Oops. Didn't select that first column. I missed that side corner. That's okay. You can also hold down the control key to multiple select. And again, we would go into that format window. Let's see if it's open. We go to our overlays here, and then we can adjust the parameters just the same globally for all of the plots that we have selected. When we move to the next step, now this is talking about replacing those negative and positive staining gates. It looks like they're pretty okay. We've got them situated in this first plot. You know, maybe we can extend out the negative a little bit here. And again, these are all going to be universal until I activate that data gate specificness, right? So if I hold that shift key down while I'm moving a gate, I'm going to create that data specific gate. And now all my universal gates are in the same place, but the one that I held down the shift key and moved has adjusted. Here we go. Just going to kind of move these gates. Oops. Let me undo that really quickly. There we go. And so that's another thing that I want to bring up. If you guys do find yourself doing something that maybe, you wanted to take back undo, that undo button is your best friend. Just click it, it will undo the thing that you did and bring you back to where you were before you made the change. So now I've got all of my gates in the right place. Everything is showing up how I'd like. All my information is introduced in those tokens. When I go to that stain index page again, all of this is going to be built new. Now it's based off this new data set. I've got those regression plots. I've got the optimal amount of antibody to use for this experiment. And I've also got this spreadsheet. So now that we've looked through two data sets, what I want to show you is our batch processing, because really this is the bread and butter, right? I do all this work. It's now going to put this in a reportable form for me. I don't have to go back and recreate the wheel here. So we're going to look at our batch tab and batch actions and look at some of the things that we've already put in here for you. Now this is completely customizable, as are all parts of this layout. So if you're liking parts of it and maybe want to change others, once you download this template, you have free reign to make it work for your workflow, your data analysis. We're going to export this out to a PDF. We're also going to save the layout, because it's important, you keep your template separate from the actual layouts that you've got your information in. So we have created an element to do that in the save layout. We've introduced a couple of tokens here so that when you save this, you'll create a new folder, and then it will have the name of the antibody here saved as part of the layout name. And these are just using tokens so that if you need to share it or move it around, this is what the software will do for you automatically without you having to recreate it. For our PDF, we are just exporting out pages 1 and 2, so that analysis plots and the stain index page. We do have a location selected here. And then most importantly, for our PowerPoint here, we're just going to do all pages so that when we're exporting it out, if any information is needed, we need to go back and review anything, all of those pieces will be there for us. So then once you have your batch actions established, really the next thing to do is run. And it's going to create these elements for me. I just have to wait for them to pop up here in the background. Sometimes they pop up in, oops, I just accidentally closed my PDF. So, all right, I can reopen it from over here. So what those tokens did in the background, and I just want to kind of throw this back to you just so you can see, is that it did create this folder automatically and from scratch. I didn't have this folder existing before, so it used that antibody name on my desktop to create this folder, and then it gave me the layout name here, that PDF, and that PowerPoint. So we'll go ahead and open up that PDF and the PowerPoint as well, opened on the other page. All right, so for this PDF, I apologize, I forgot to go through the additional steps in our SOP there. That's why we still have this arrow present. But if you complete the SOP, the next step is the batch processing and how to run this batch action. So this wouldn't be present if you had followed the SOP. So there we go. We have our plots here and we have those regression spreadsheets. Now, I know you may have noticed at this point, like, Robin, that's really great, but that bottom spreadsheet that has all of the information about all the other things that were included isn't on that PDF. And we actually did that intentionally. We want you to be able to export this as a whole. So one thing that's really great, when you select our spreadsheets in FCS Express, you get two new tabs. One is a layout tab where we can do a lot of formatting. We can even export directly, right? I didn't want this to be chopped off when you're doing your reportables. I wanted it to be exported intact. So I kind of like just to export this out individually. We also have some formulas. If you were looking at any of those formulas we used in the spreadsheet, this is a place that you can find them as well. So once you have selected your spreadsheet, you can just do an export here. It's auto-directed to my folder here. It's actually a different folder. And then I can just put my CD 3 V7A. Click here. And then it's going to export that spreadsheet for me. I'm going to throw over our PowerPoint as well. So on our PowerPoint, we do have the ability to grab things that are falling off the edges of our report. So you can include things. You can actually exclude that in our options as well if you didn't want to see your 84th percentile plots. But if you notice on the PDF, it was everything that was showing on the page was what was showing on that that report. Also, if you do come in here and you're like, oh gosh, you know, Robin, you moved this staining plots thing and you forgot to put it back, you can make that adjustment in the PowerPoint. So you're not like stuck. You know, there's some things that you can adjust if you needed to. Then you see here, we have the antibody concentration to use. And then part of that, part of that spreadsheet is also here at the bottom of this page. See if I can get this to come down. But the thing is here, it's not an active spreadsheet. It's just an object on this report. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that spreadsheet here. And so all of that information that we had generated in the spreadsheet in FCS Express is now generated here. If there was anything downstream that you wanted to do to follow up with this analysis, you could start working in Excel as if you just created it here. So you would just keep moving forward with your analysis, whatever downstream activities you needed to do. And we won't save that. And I'll close out our PowerPoint. And so here we're back into our template. I'm going to go ahead and just show that last step of exporting our results here. And then I'm going to finish our SOP. When you finish the SOP, it will auto close for you. So that is it for my portion. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the questions box, and we're going to get right back to you. I'm going to hand this presentation back over to Juan so that he can discuss some of the tools and features that we have if you didn't want to use our template and maybe build a titration analysis on your own.
Great, thank you, Robin. So the overall point of today's webinar was basically to show you there are different ways of how you can analyze data. So the template that Robin created, as I mentioned earlier, is available for download on our website. And I actually put the website in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I did make it a public answer so that way you should be able to see the link through which you can download that layout, okay? However, as with anything, there's always two sides to that coin, right? Especially when it comes to methods of how you can analyze this data. And basically the way we look at it is you can either make a layout that's specific for a particular application, all right? In this case, the idea is that you have a multi-tube iteration, right, that you can analyze within a particular layout. So whether it's a 5-tube layout, a 6-tube layout, a 7-tube layout, okay? And then what you can do is you can actually use FCS Express to basically package all the analysis that's done for that group of data. And what this allows you to do, will allow you to create a highly specialized layout for the analysis of that group of data. So the idea is that we attach a panel. That panel is basically specific to the number of tubes that you have in that titration experiment. So whether it's 5, 6, 7, or maybe you actually want to create something a little bit more elaborate where maybe you have more tubes in your panel, then you can use this layout kind of as a starting point to basically modify that layout to get you the analysis that you're looking for with your specific titration data, okay? But with this specific multi-tube iteration method, the idea is that you create plots within the layout to display the data from all your titration controls. And all these plots are basically spread out across pages. You can use all the different tools in FCS Express to represent that data in whatever method you want, as you've seen through Robin's presentation. And the overall benefit is that basically that layout has this notebook style format. So that way you have all the information about that titration experiment within one layout. You can batch that data out, and then you have an archived copy of that data if you use the save layout option as part of that batching technique. Okay, and thankfully we've done a lot of that work for you through that layout that Robin presented. Now, the other side to the coin of this particular topic is that you could be much more minimalistic. Maybe you don't necessarily need all the features that you've seen. Maybe you simply just want to be able to play your data all through a template and just get information directly from FCS Express or export it to Excel, or maybe simply just continue working with it in FCS Express in this global fashion, right? So the idea is that you can create a global type template that has more of a minimalistic style. And essentially using this method, you're basically looking at a 3-parameter assay, right? So you have probably 2 parameters in which you need to create your gates, maybe some type of scatter parameter. And then you have a 3rd parameter, which is going to be usually your titration parameter. Now, obviously there are probably other people out there that might want to incorporate some other type of complexity to their gating hierarchy. Maybe they want to do some type of doublet discrimination, or maybe there's going to be some type of fluorescence optimization that they want to do or for their gating. Those can certainly be included as part of this. But the idea is that you're creating a template so that way you can basically analyze a single file at a time from your titration experiment, and then you can export that data to a third-party application like Excel, or you can actually use one of the features in FCS Express and continue working with that data in FCS Express. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you basically a high-level overview of something that we can create and how we can actually go about creating this. Okay, so here's a template. So this is what I'm talking about, you having a global template. So we basically have a single-page template. We have some basic plots, and we're going to be reporting some certain stats. And the idea is that we can load our data into this layout. You can filter for whatever the data is that's for your platform. And then once we load our data into our data list, then we can change that data on all these plots. Okay. And then the idea is that as we go from file to file, we can analyze this data we can determine MFIs, we can determine whatever stat we need for whatever information we want to gather, whatever metric we want to create as part of this titration experiment. Okay. We can have FCS Express extract that information. And what we can do is we can have FCS Express extract this information, export it through our batch processing capabilities. So whether we want to export to Excel, or if you're on our most current version of FCS Express version 7, you can export to an internal spreadsheet. Okay. And for those of you familiar with our snapshots tool, what we can do is we can actually go from sample to sample, and we can use our iteration snapshot as a way for FCS Express to remember what the positioning of all our gates and markers and quadrants, if we want to include a quadrant in an analysis like this, for each iteration of data. Okay, and in this case, we're dealing with 7 files that make up our titration experiment. We're treating each one separately, and we're just going to be analyzing a single one at a time, rather than the group that Robin demonstrated earlier. Okay, so by using that iteration snapshot tool, now what I can do is I can go from sample to sample. I can move my markers around. I can move any gates around. I can optimize whatever gating tool that I'm using for my data set. And then FCS Express will remember the coordinates for each of those tools as I go. Okay, and don't worry about how we got here. And in a second, once we actually go through this, I'll show you how we can actually create this on a blank layout and how we can start from scratch if this is something that you want to do, rather than the group specific type analysis. Okay. You'll see that there are many different features that can help facilitate this. So we can actually link markers together. We can use contour plots as a way to determine maybe where a value of our data is. I actually like contour plots or density plots as looking at a way to see where the separation of your data is. Histogram can be great, but sometimes it can be somewhat vague as to where your negative starts, where your positive ends. Okay. And again, I'm just going to continue until we get to our final point. That looks good to me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our batch tab, and rather than click on our run, I'm going to put my data list back on my first sample. I'm going to click on rerun. And then what you'll see is FCS Express will go through the batch, and you'll see how all the markers, all the different things that we've included as part of this will move along and remember what the positioning was for those gates and those markers for each iteration of data. Okay. And again, using our batch actions tool, what we can do is we can export to different sources if we want to analyze this data. So on my other screen here, I have the same information I see here. I have exported all this data. So if I wanted to do some charting in Excel, I now have this data in Excel that was exported directly from FCS Express. But you'll also notice that what I've also done is I've exported that same data to an internal spreadsheet directly in my FCS Express layout. Okay. And just to show you, these are all the same numbers. Everything that's reported up here is the same information that's reported in this Excel output. Okay, I can simply just scroll along, and again, you'll see all the same information that was exported and reported to Excel. Okay, the benefit of having directly in FCS Express now is that I can come in, if I wanted to create some different charts to represent this data graphically, then what I can do is I can come into my Insert tab, and I can insert something like a bar chart. Or if I just click on that tool and draw it, you'll see that FCS Express will draw a bar chart for each sample, for each concentration that I have here, versus a particular stat. Okay, I can click on the y-axis and change whatever statistic I want. So maybe rather than the stain index, maybe I want to look at the separation index, and I can see how my metrics are represented that way. Or maybe I want to do a side-by-side comparison within this bar chart. What I can do is I can take this spreadsheet, just drag it on top of this bar chart, and I can add this as an overlay. And then I can format this bar chart so that way that red tab, that red bar, will actually represent my separation index rather than my stain index. Okay, and it's all directly here within my layout for me. Okay, if I wanted to create some type of scatter plot, Again, I could find that tool. So whether I draw a scatter plot, I'm running out of real estate, but the idea is the same thing where I can simply just graph that out. If I actually want to display that data as an overlay as well, I can just drag my spreadsheet over onto that scatter plot, and again, format it. So that way, one layer of data represents my stain index, another layer represents another statistic. And then what I can do is if I want to connect the lines, I can select that option, and then I can see how my data looks based off of that information. Whether you use stain index, separation index, that's up to you. Just know that whatever metric you decide to use, as long as you're consistent with it, you should see fairly a similar shape to your data. And the overall idea is that you basically would like to use a concentration where you see that inflection point for the stain index or the separation index. In other words, what's the highest value for that separation index and stain index? And for the most part, you should see that should be basically the same point. Okay, so how did we get here, first of all? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a brand new layout. And basically, we're just going to start like we would with any type of layout in FCS Express, where we can add data to this layout. So I'm just going to go through our data tab and open up our data list. For those of you that are not familiar with our data list, the data list is basically the bridge between FCS Express and whatever operating system you're using. And we're going to add data to this list that we're going to work with as our titration controls. So I'm just going to click on the plus sign. I'm going to navigate, grab some titration data, and again, depending on the source of your data, whether it's from a cytometer that produces FCS data or LMD data, you can just choose the file type for which you're filtering and select those files. Okay, and as I mentioned, the idea is that we're going to basically be creating a template where we're going to play all of our data through this template. So what we need to do is simply just create different plots to represent that data. So if I just take a data file and just load it and drag and drop it onto my layout, you'll see that I'll be able to create different plots for that file. So maybe I actually want to show a density plot in a histogram. I can do that. And I can just manipulate these and move these however I want. Okay. Maybe I want another density plot. Maybe I want another histogram. I can cut, copy, paste. I can duplicate. And I can simply just place these wherever I want. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is simply just gate our data. Okay, so if you're simply just interested in a scatter gate, then on one of the plots, just format that plot for the different parameters that you want to use to create that gate. So forward scatter versus side scatter. You can comb through all the different parameters in that data set, or you can just type in the search field for the parameter that you're looking for. Okay, we'll go to our gating tab. We use the gating tool of our choice. I'm just going to use an elliptical gate to keep it easy, and just circle my events of interest. And when I look over the mouse, I'll get this window. I can give this gate a name. Just click OK. Okay, all these other plots, if I want to apply this gate to these plots, I could drag and drop it, or if I just select these plots, then I can apply this gate to that directly from my gates tab, where I can select the current gate from that drop-down window. If you're OCD like me and maybe you want to line these up, you can simply just select all these plots. You can go to your home tab. You can align these from the top. You can also distribute them evenly horizontally. Or if you want to align these from the left, same idea, you can just select your plots and simply select that option. Okay, so as you probably figured out by now, this is SciTech data. So when it comes to SciTech data, you might not necessarily know what the detector is on which you're measuring a particular fluorochrome. So what you want to do is you'll basically want to set these parameters to look at that. So I'm looking at controls coming from a particular fluorochrome that I know that's going to be measured in detector B9. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply set this axis here to look at my B9 parameter, and the same thing with this. Okay. So whether I format it here directly from this menu, or if I right-click on this plot and choose Format, I can determine the X parameter directly from this menu as well. Okay. Again, if there are any questions as we go along, please feel free to put them into the question section or go to Webinar Control Panel. And same thing over here. Okay. So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to put some markers here because I'm going to measure my negative and my positive peak. And the way we do that is from the gating tab. So from the gating tab, you'll see that there's a marker option here where if I click on that, I can draw my markers for both my negative and positive peaks. Okay. And what I like to do is with my markers, I actually like to link them in the middle. So that way I just have a single vertex to control between the two. And the way I can link them is simply just by taking one end and just dragging it over the other. And you'll see how my cursor will change to a plus sign, where if I let go, now I can actually control the high point and low point of those two markers together. Okay, so now I have a positive peak, I have a negative peak. If I want to gather statistics from that histogram, if I just right-click on that histogram, I can choose histogram statistics. And I can gather whatever statistics I need for these two markers within this plot. And if there are more statistics that you need from this particular table, if you just right-click on here, you can pick and choose what stats you want. This table that you see here is simply defined through your FCS Express user options, where you can define what you want for default for your 1D plot stats. And you'll see that there's also a category for 2D plot stats too. Okay. All right, so we have our positive, we have our negative. From this, we're going to need our median. We're also going to need a standard deviation, right? Specifically for the negative peak. What we're also going to do is we're going to create a separation index. So what that means is we're going to need an 84th percentile from our negative peak. And the way I'm going to do that here is by taking this M1 marker, and I'm going to convert this to a gate. I'm going to call this my negative. I'm going to make it a dark blue color because I like dark blue. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to represent that gate on this plot just by right-clicking on here and using my Show Gates tool. Okay, so this option, Show Gates, will show me the gate border for any gate that was created on that parameter. Okay, so we have B9. I converted this to a gate in my B9 parameter. I should be able to now see that gate directly within this window. Okay, and as I move this marker, you're going to see how that's going to move too. Okay, and for those of you wondering out there, well, I have a density plot, I had a contour plot earlier, what gives? Well, what we can do is we can simply just format that, where if I select that plot, I can go into my format option and just change the plot type from one type to another. Maybe it's a contour. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that negative plot to this histogram down here, so that way we can look at the 84th percentile of that population. Okay. So I can take this, drag it onto that plot. And again, you'll see that as my data updates, this will all update in real time. Okay. Now, to get the 84th percentile, what we'll need to do is we'll need to create a custom token. So the custom token will allow me to formulate any statistic that I want to create in my layout. And for percentiles, we have a specific function that will actually look at the data in a plot and will formulate a number based off of whatever percentile we specify within that function. Okay. So within my custom token window, I'll add a custom token, and down below, I'm going to define what the function is going to be. And if you right-click within this window, you'll see that there's an option for insert function, and specifically that there's going to be a function underneath our statistics category for a percentile plot. And what this means, it's going to determine the percentile of data for the data within a particular plot, on a particular axis, or a particular overlay within that plot. Okay. So we already know that I'm looking for the 84th, so I'm going to actually type in 84. We also know that I only have one layer of data, so I'm looking at my first overlay. I also know that I'm looking at the data on my x-axis, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put in quotes. I'm going to type in the axis label, x in this case. What we need to know is the plot number. And we can easily get that through one of the tools available in our FCS Express layout called a navigator. Okay. And specifically, the layout navigator shows us all the different objects that we created within a layout. Okay. As you can see here, all the objects that we create in a layout have a number, and that's how we can actually refer to different plots. So when we tell FCS Express that I need a particular statistic coming from a plot, I can say, grab me this stat from histogram number 2. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to type in number 2 here. And if I drag this on here, it's going to give me the 84th percentile of the data that's in that plot. And you'll see how, as I move my data, that's all going to automatically update. Okay. So now let's talk about the batch processing feature. So we have our plots, we have our gates, we have our stats that we need to do what we need to do. Okay. The one thing that we haven't done yet is we haven't really defined what we're going to do for our stain index or our separation index. Okay. So what we can do is we can go back to our custom token window. I'm actually going to add a new custom token to look at my stain index. And we're going to define that, again, using a function that's available within FCS Express. And again, from the statistics category, you'll see that there's a function for my stain index. Okay. So the stain index is looking for 3 variables. Okay. So we're looking for the positive population mean or median, whatever we decide to use. I'm using median in this case. We're looking for the negative population mean or median, and then we're looking for the negative population standard deviation. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just clear this all out. And I'm actually going to drag and drop from our data to fill the variables of that function. Okay. All right, so I need the positive median. Just drag that right between those parentheses. Put my comma. I'm going to take our negative median. Put another comma, and then we're going to take our standard deviation from our negative population. And again, drag that into that formula. Okay. If I just drag down to my layout, I can see what that stain index is. I'm going to create another function for my separation index. Where down below, I will define what that separation index is. And for those of you that aren't familiar, our separation index is going to be looking at the positive median minus the negative median divided by the 84th percentile of our negative median divided by 0.995. Okay. And actually, just so For my reference, I'm going to take this from this layout. I'm actually just going to copy it over here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to define my separation index as this, subtracted by my negative median, divided by my 84th percentile. And that's this custom token here. So now what I can do is I can actually take this and just drag it down to here. Okay, so now I have my 84th percentile divided by 0.995. If I drag it onto my layout, I'll be able to see what the number is for that metric as well. Okay. Now, if we're looking to report this data, if you simply want to see this data on your layout, what we could do is we can create a table, we can create a spreadsheet. We can basically just drag and drop this onto our layout like this, and we can just see the numbers update as we load our data. Okay, so you'll see all this information will update as we update our data. So if I just go from file to file, you're going to see how those numbers update based off of whatever positioning I've decided to use for my data sets. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to insert a spreadsheet here. So if I just click on my Insert tab, I'm going to click on Insert Spreadsheet and give it a name for My Stats. And I'm going to move it around down here and just expand it a little bit. And the reason why I'm putting this spreadsheet here is not necessarily just to drag and drop stuff into it. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this as part of our batch reporting. Okay. So if I go to my Batch tab, what I can do is I can create a list of batch actions to define the different outputs that I want for my data. Okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with batch processing, the idea is that we can define the different actions or formats in which we want to export data from an FCS Express layout. So whether we want to export to PowerPoint, PDF, a picture, whatever it may be. Okay. We want to archive our data, or if we want to export to a third-party application like Excel. Okay. From this Add Report section, we can export to Excel just by clicking on the Export to Excel column mode. And what that will do, it'll allow us to basically define all the different stats that we want to export to this output, where each stat will be a separate column. Each iteration of data that we're analyzing will be a separate row. Okay, so I'm actually going to click on this folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save this on my desktop. Okay. So by clicking on that folder, you'll get the opportunity to determine where you're going to save this output file. You can give it a name and click Save, and then click OK. Okay. So now what we do is we add stats that we want to export to that output. And we can do that through either this Add Item to Report, where we can select a stat or a keyword that we want to export to our data. But we can also just take data as a plot and just drag and drop it onto that output. Okay, and from here I can tell the software, do I want to extract a keyword or do I want to extract a stat? In this case, I'm going to extract a keyword. And the particular keyword that I'm looking for is actually a keyword for concentration. Okay. If I know what the keyword is, I could simply just type it in. Otherwise, I could browse through the file header and use that for reporting. Okay. When we export to Excel, we can define not only what stat or what keyword we want to represent, but also what column header does FCS Express write to the output file, to Excel. Okay. So if we leave this blank, it's simply just going to use the column label that you see here. Or if you want something specific, like simply concentration, then what you can do is you can format this for the field to have a specific title. So when we actually do this batch, when I open up the Excel, you'll see that the column header for that concentration keyword will simply just say concentration. Okay. Now what we could do is we can also just drag and drop different things on here. So maybe I want to drag a median or export a median, I could do that. Or if I want to export any of those custom tokens that I've created, maybe I want to export the stain index and then write the column label for that. Or the separation index. Same idea. Okay. If I wanted to export a median, I can actually just take that data directly from this table and just drag it over. And when I drag it over, you'll see the full output of what that information is. So the median for my M1 peak, the median for my M2 peak. Again, if I wanted to find what the column label is in the output, I could just type that in there just by formatting the properties for that action and then just customizing what I want to see in that field. Okay. And then at this point, let's say we actually want to export to an internal spreadsheet. Okay, so starting with FCS Express version 7.0.0018, we now have the ability to export to an internal spreadsheet. Okay, so within our batch action window, you'll see that there's an option to export to spreadsheet, where if I click on that, it'll give me the opportunity to define the spreadsheet to which I want to write and where I want to start writing information in that spreadsheet. So whatever row, whatever column, and whether or not I want to write column labels. I'm going to click OK. You can see it's now added to the list. I can go through the same process of dragging information to this, but what I can also do is I can simply just copy and paste. So if I actually just select these, copy, paste, whatever information was being exported to Excel will also now be exported to this spreadsheet, and it all retains its original formatting. So if you customize any type of labeling or column information, header information, it'll all be retained there as well. Okay. And the idea is that when we batch, FCS Express will start with whatever the first file is that we have on display. Okay, so I've loaded this one. It'll go to whatever the last file is that you have in your data list, whatever the last iteration is. Okay. And the idea is that if I click on run, it will go through all these files and produce the outputs that I've selected. Okay. What I can do is I can tell FCS Express to pause. So maybe I want to tweak my gates as I go between each of these samples. So now if I click run, you'll see now it's loaded the next file. And now at this point, I can actually just maneuver my data, click continue. And I can adjust my gates, my markers, however fits my data. Okay. If I'm okay where the gates are placed or the markers are placed, I don't necessarily need to worry about adjusting these. I can actually just tell the software run to end, and then we'll just start and finish off the last sample. So here's the output from this particular batch. And here is the data that was written to the internal spreadsheet directly from FCS Express. Okay, very easy, very convenient. And the idea is that this is all one template. So if you actually wanted to save this, maybe on my desktop or something, maybe as an unlinked layout. Then what I can do is the next time I open up FCS Express, I can simply just load my data in here, whether it's for that titration or another titration. And I can make whatever changes I need to make. So for example, maybe I need to change the parameter. So maybe rather than this particular parameter, maybe I want to load another parameter set like this parameter that's actually being measured in my yellow-green 1 detector. Okay. Again, I could just simply take this information and just change these all at once. So for these histograms, I can format the overlay where I can select my yellow-green. And same thing with this contour plot where I just click on the y-axis. I could just filter for the yellow-green. Again, I can use the same options that I've selected before, and these will all be automatically updated for me as I analyze my data. Okay. There are different features that we can add as well. As Robin talked about in her earlier template, what we can do is we can also do scripting, where the idea is that FCS Express can ask you questions about your data as you load it into a layout, and we can customize the information. So example, I can select a file. I can create questions as part of the script where the questions ask me what are the parameters for which I want to use for my gating. So maybe I want to use side scatter and forward scatter for my gates. What I can do is I can select those parameters. You'll see here that we can create questions to ask specifically what the X and Y parameters are going to be. I can click next, and then I can also ask questions like what are the overall parameters in my data set. So if I have 3 parameters, I can select that, plus the parameter that I'm titrating. Oop. I think I might click, did I select another one? Yep. You'll see that FCS Express will load our data into the plots as well as load the data in that folder directly into our layout. Okay, so if you're a core lab that has multiple platforms, you need to titrate data from multiple platforms for multiple detectors, different parameters, different resolutions, this is a great way to do that, because what you can do is you can customize quite a bit of these plots, the display of these plots for data coming from various platforms. Okay. So I realize that we're actually a little bit over time, but for those of you still hanging around, I appreciate, we thank you for your patience. And that pretty much wraps up the webinar for today. So in conclusion, hopefully you can see that we all know that antibody titration is a crucial part of the routine workflow in a lab, as it's crucial in the development of a panel within a flow cytometry lab to help optimize your data. And hopefully from today's presentation, you can see that FCS Express has a lot of tools that can allow you to set up a standardized and reproducible analysis method all directly within one software. And as Robin illustrated earlier, we do now offer templates on our website that you can download. Anyone can download them as they need to, and they're available for use with our most current version of FCS Express 7. So you can either use these templates as you need to right out of the box, or you could simply just use them as a starting point and tailor them to your needs. Okay. For those of you that aren't customers currently and are interested in FCS Express, please know that you can go to our website and download a free 30-day demo. If you have any questions, please contact us at support@denovosoftware.com. In the meantime, we'll stay on the line for a couple of minutes if there are any further questions. Otherwise, again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions.